It says transcription has started, so I think we're good to go. Okay, great, let's do it. Cool. So welcome, Lucy. So Lucy is a first-year PhD student at the University of Winchester, situated in the Department of Education and Childhood Studies, specifically the Centre for Philosophy and Education. So Lucy's research focuses on the overlooked perpetrator of the Holocaust, feminist ethics, and the ethics of care. So yeah, Lucy, feel free to go ahead.
Thank you very much. So the title of my paper is Totalitarianism and the Public and Private Self, What Allows for the Double Standard. So a double standard can be understood as a rule or principle which is unfairly applied or applied in different ways to different groups of people. Simply by imposing a double standard, one group is favoured over others. I just want to acknowledge at the start, for the purpose of this presentation, I'm focusing on the genders male and female. A double standard can obviously be applied to any gender or any circumstance. However, due to my research focus on Nazi women, it will be centred this way. And in order to focus this paper, I will look into the public and private spheres and the impact of totalitarianism, specifically from the political theorist Hannah Arendt. If there are rules that govern these domains, then it is important to identify what this could mean. In addition to this, I will also highlight work from MacKinnon and her research in how, despite having the public and private realm, women are doubly deprived of privacy. They don't have a traditional voice in the public sphere. So totalitarianism then, the origins of totalitarianism was Arendt's first major work, where she aimed to describe the essence of totalitarianism. The book itself isn't just a historical text, but predominantly a philosophical inquiry as to what really is at the core of totalitarianism. The term can be described in different ways and can often be associated with the structures of communism. However, a known model of it is described as a totally coherent socio-political system, a state built in the image of ideology, presided over by a single legitimized by the ideology, employing unlimited powers of coercion and indoctrination to prevent any deviation from orthodoxy. It is important to note early on, totalitarianism in Arendt's case follows a structure which is chaotic, non-utilitarian, monarchically dynamic movement of destruction that assails all the features of human nature and the human world that makes politics possible. Alongside this, it is incredibly focused on Nazism and Stalinism, excluding fascist Italy and the Soviet Union before and after Stalin's rule. So when analysing a totalitarian government, it is easy to think of tyranny, which refers to when absolute power is granted to a ruler, and the ruler then becomes corrupt and uses their power for their own interests. Rather than saying a totalitarian government hasn't been done or known about before, it can be argued that it has exploited the very alternative on which all definitions of the essence of governments have been based in political philosophy. That is the alternative between lawful and lawless government, between arbitrary and legitimate power. It is a government which has confronted us with something new. So there is also a paradox here which represented an assault on the ability to think and act as an individual. Totalitarianism itself is law itself. It embodies everything under its rule, and it does not replace one set of laws with another. The separation has gone, which is likely to encroach into the public and private spheres due to the nature of law being completely disrupted. Totalitarianism is also made up of two crucial complex ideas, which Arendt determines as terror and ideology. Arendt describes terror, or total terror, as the essence of a totalitarian government, as rather than rushing into extermination, time was invested into the eradication of select groups' individuality and agency. It was used as a way to suppress any opposition. Terror becomes total once it becomes independent of all opposition. It rules supreme when nobody any longer stands in its way. A totalitarian regime will strive not towards a tyrannical rule over all people, but rather a system which regards select groups as superfluous. So Arendt addresses how a non-tyrannical government is considered lawfulness, the fact of being allowed or recognised by the law. A tyrannical government is considered lawlessness, a state of disorder. Then a totalitarian government's essence is terror, thus reaffirming how a totalitarian system is something unique. The totalitarian state will strive constantly through, though never with the complete success, to establish the superfluity of man by the arbitrary selection of various groups for concentration camps, by constant purges of the ruling apparatus by mass liquidations. By marking people as superfluous, this is how opposition would be removed. However, this can only be achieved with the addition of ideology. In addition to terror, Arendt argues how totalitarianism arises when people are disconnected from each other. The social bonds which typically hold a society together aren't as strong as they had been due to the social unrest, etc., caused by the lack of coherence of the Weimar Republic. Totalitarianism will then arise when either a movement or strong man enters who offers a story or ideology which claims to provide an explanation and potential resolution to the current societal situation. So due to the world around the systems being uprooted, their view on reality is skewed. They are then vulnerable to the incoming harmful ideologies, as not only are uprooted people who have lost a stable human world easy victims for terror, but loss of the world also damaged people's hold on reality. So in regard then to the public, the private and the social spheres, a simple explanation follows in regards to the public and the private. So in regards to the public realm, citizens have a chance to express their ideas and public opinion can be formed. The public is seen as political. Whereas the private realm is where you can be your authentic self and houses vital production, for example, children. Within the Human Condition, a book by Hannah Arendt, she starts by taking the reader back to ancient times, and she outlines how ancient Greek life was divided into two realms, the public and the private. The private realm was the site in which the household ruled, and it was a place for heads of household to take care of the food, shelter, and sexual needs. It was not about intimacy, as it is thought of now, but rather a biological necessity. So compared to this, the public realm was for the performance of action and the freedom from biological necessities, where one could distinguish themselves whilst also expressing their opinions / themselves. Property was often required as well due to the need for a space where biological necessities could take place. And without property, you are unlikely to be free in a public realm. Of course, slaves and subordinated women were confined to the private realm in order to take care of the heads of households' needs. And Arendt explains how the ancient Greek city, the polis, was prevented from violating the private lives of people and keeping the boundaries around property sacred was not through the respect of said property, but rather the fact that without owning a house, a man could not participate in the affairs of the world because he had no location in which the property was his own. Man must engage in biological functions which took place in the private realm in order to participate in the public. If he did not, he would not have access to the public realm, at least not as a fully participating citizen. However, this is not how it has come to look in modern society. Arendt writes how the distinction between the public and private spheres of life can correspond to the public and private realms and remain distinct. However, the emergence of the social realm, which is neither public nor private, strictly speaking, is a relatively new phenomenon, whose origin coincided with the emergence of the modern age. Due to the rise of the household or activities traditionally held in the private realm now emerging into the public, Arendt describes this as a collective concern, as in the modern world, the two realms indeed constantly flow into each other like waves in the never-resting stream of life process itself. The emergence of society has blurred the line between the private and the political, but it has changed beyond almost recognition the meaning of the two terms and their significance for the life of the individual and the citizen. For example, privacy was considered private in ancient times, and what was done within the home was kept within the home. The social realm complicates the relation between the public and the private, and it blurs the boundaries which contributes to the double standard. So Arendt saw the social realm as a threat to the public and private realm, as in order to provide everyone their required needs, the social realm has to invade the private sphere and therefore makes the biological needs a public matter. With the rise of the social realm and activities being moved from the private into the public, there is a transformation which takes place, where modern communities are turned into societies of labourers and job holders. To be clear, Arendt is referring to how all members consider whatever they do primarily as a way to sustain their own lives and those of their families. The activities which are the driving force for sheer survival have been transformed from private biological matters to public means to an end. If the case is that the private becomes public, then the private realm may slowly cease to exist, which in relation to Nazi Germany, the monarchical structure of totalitarianism plays a factor. Arendt also mentions the division of labour and how it is precisely what happens to the labouring activity under conditions of the public realm and what could never have happened in the privacy of the household. The gender division of labour also exists, where the allocation of the different jobs / types of work are given to men and women in both the paid and unpaid work in the public and private life. It appears that women have been the easiest to manipulate between the different types of labour in the different realms. This was particularly aided by the Nazist ideology which thrived at the time, which is what I'm moving on to now. So, before becoming the chief propaganda minister for the Nazi Party, Joseph Goebbels had written a book which included an ideology which the Third Reich would come to adopt. In a nutshell, he signalled to women that they must be beautiful and bring children into the world. Alongside this, he must be attractive, specifically for her husband. In exchange for having children, he would provide for them. A woman's highest calling would be to have children, and in order to do so, women should not mix themselves up in the public world. Their own private sphere was the foundation of everything else. To the Nazis, Nazi women's essential function was to purely produce children in order to drive up the population growth, as well as produce and nurture future generations of National Socialists. An increase to the birth rate was one of the overriding goals of the regime. Women had Magda Goebbels, wife to Joseph, to look up to and was known as the First Lady of the Reich. And alongside this title, she became the poster woman for motherhood in Germany. So, for example, on Sunday, the 14th of May, 1933, she gave the first Mother's Day radio address, as well as her and her children being constantly photographed for magazines and periodicals as an example of the perfect Nazi family. When the party weren't meeting their expected targets, they introduced the Honour Cross of the German mother, which, in a twisted way, was a medal for the most productive of women, productive referring to how many babies they gave birth to, and 3 million mothers were awarded a level of the Honour Cross. Womanhood and motherhood played a huge part in propaganda. In theory, a notion of care was thrust upon them. Women who were deemed pure became the safeguard of a racially pure state. And by relegating them out of the public sphere, it not only allowed them to do what the Nazis thought they should be doing, but it also protected the women and the future generation of the Volk. Whilst this ideology became incredibly prominent in the lives of German women, it also relegated them solely into the private sphere, which heroized motherhood and domestic life. So the nature of the laws and ideologies that were brought in place by the Nazis created a third sphere, which was the home. Typically, the private sphere will have different altered social laws which govern it. However, with the impact of terror and totalitarianism, even the private and or the home spheres were subjected to the surveillance and regulation by both the law enforcers and the people who abided by them. Due to the nature of the current discussion, this is why I want to bring in Catherine MacKinnon, as she believes how, despite having the public and private realm, women are doubly deprived of privacy. She argues how women do not have a traditional voice in the public sphere, and the private sphere is dictated by men, even whilst the women are confined to it. Whilst the article Feminism, Marxism, Method and State and Agenda for Theory was published in 1982, some of the themes which appear correlate with the ideology present in Nazi Germany. For example, a contemporary industrial version of her is docile, soft, passive, nurturant, vulnerable, weak, narcissistic, childlike, incompetent, masochistic, and domestic, made for childcare, home care, and husband care. Conditioning these values permeates the upbringing of girls and the images for emulation thrust upon women. You are automatically considered less of a woman/female if you resist, fail. Those who are automatically sat outside the racial norm, assertively self-respecting, have aspirations which match those men or soft or weak. If you don't fit in those categories, then you are deemed lucky and seen as a model, tokenized by success on male terms, or portrayed as consenting to their natural place and dismissed as having participated if they complain. This, of course, is governed by a patriarchal society. Patriarchy as a phenomenon, is a system of society government where cisgendered men hold the power and domination over the public and private spheres where women are largely excluded. A power relationship between men and women. So women become objects for control, especially when it comes to child rearing and female women's bodies, for example. Whilst the majority of women consented to creating and raising multiple children, we're back in Nazi Germany now to help the Volk grow. They, in theory, become a commodity, a means to an end, all the while pushing them further from the public sphere. So whilst researching an average Nazi woman, it is apparent they do not fit solely in one category, partially determined by Nazi ideology and patriarchal standards. They were unlikely to have their own autonomy whilst they were pushed further into the private realm. Whilst this raises multiple questions, especially in relation to the notion of care, one thing is clear: the average Nazi woman is likely to have been deprived of privacy, whether she was a perpetrator or not. And that is the end. Thank you very much.